Hello and welcome back. In the last section, we looked at integrating our API server with the MongoDB database, all right? So we have a preliminary connection that's going back and forth between MongoDB and our API server. The next thing is, how do we handle error handling with our APIs? Error handling is one of the very important aspects of any API development because it can raise specific errors that happen during the course of the execution of the API. So it's important to get that correctly. So let's do a couple of experiments here. And I'm going to say, instead of categories, I'll say categories 2, which is a non-existent route right now, and see how essentially it responds. So right now you get an HTML error back, which is something that you can call human-friendly, but it's not necessarily a machine-friendly error. Machine-to-machine communications would typically expect some kind of structured errors to be passed back to the caller, which could be in the form of XML or JSON. Okay, so that's something that we need to essentially define and wire up in our project. Every time an API encounters an error, it needs to send back an error in a specific format. Okay. And how do we go about it is something that we need to design in this particular lesson. Let's head over to Google and look for a package called npm http-errors. This is a very interesting and very useful package. Okay, let's click on this one. It allows the API execution flow to identify errors and send them back to the caller. Okay, so here's an example here. We install it, post that. We define a middleware which says, if the user is not in here, then we create error using the create error function and giving in a particular status code and a custom messaging. All right. And we can call the next function in the workflow or the pipeline. Okay, and there are different ways to actually create errors here. If you want to create an error with the 404, you can either do it this way, or you can also do it this way here. All right, multiple ways to do that. So it's a very handy dandy npm package that we can essentially integrate with to handle the error handling. Let's go back now to our code base. And I'm going to split my terminal in here. Let's go ahead and split the terminal. I think it created a new terminal. No problem. So in here, I'm going to say npm I and http errors, essentially install http-errors package, npm package. Okay. Click enter, and I'm going to pause until this completes. All right. So that got completed in no time. All right. Super. So let's see how we can use that, and I'm going to head over to my index.js file now and incorporate or requiring this new error package. Alright, so let me go here and say const create error is equal to require http-errors. Okay, alright. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a middleware, okay, which says any error that's not found has to follow this particular path. So let me first code it up and then I'll explain what is actually happening behind the scenes. So I'll go to the very end of this file and say app.use, okay, and I'm going to say this is going to be an async call, by the way, async method, okay. And this is going to take a request and response and the next function, okay? And what this means is that anytime there is no matching for any of the routes, this is going to be invoked. Essentially, what it's going to do is it'll use the next function and it'll supply that with a error, which is created by create error, right? So what I'm going to do is create error dot not found. Okay, I think it has to be uppercase. So what this is going to do is this is going to essentially take care of all those errors which are relating to the 404 cases where we don't have a valid route supplied, okay, or there's something that's not supported. And so essentially this is going to create an error, and we need to catch this error also, send this error back to the caller, right? We will define another middleware here that's going to say app.use, and I'm going to provide a function that takes the error and the request response, and as well as the next function. Okay, and what this is going to do now is we will make use of the response object, and we will set the status to either the error.status, right, which is essentially set here, set in this particular previous middleware, okay, error.status, or we will hardcode that to 500, okay, defaulted to 500 essentially, which boils down to like something like internal server error, okay, and then we will send this error back to the client by using the response object and send function, and the response object will contain error object, and that will encompass the status, okay, and the status would be again error.status or 500, and then it will also contain a message here. The message is something that we create here. The error.create error.notfound will create a message. If you saw before, it'll actually create a message something like this. All right, 404 obviously it'll say not found. So let's go ahead and send that message. It's going to be error.message, or we will default it to, let's say, internal server error. This is nice. So essentially anytime an error happens, anytime we supply a, let's say, non-existent route, this will be trapped by this middleware. It'll create an error that's going to be passed to the second middleware, okay, using the next function. And in here we'll use a res object, which is a response object, and send back the error here, okay, the appropriate error with the status and the message. And let's see if we can actually make use of it now. Let me close this window for now. So I see that there is no errors here right now in our code. I'll head over to the REST client, and in here I'm going to go ahead and execute the same error where we executed before, where we got the HTTP error response. Let's go ahead and then send request. Voila, this is actually what we expected. So right now we get an error in the form of JSON, and it says status is 404 and message is not found. Standard stuff, right? Super. So we have the error handling mechanism wired into our API server, and we can use this in future whenever there are workflow related errors or any kind of errors to trigger this error handling mechanism. So what we're going to do now is we will go over to our category routes, and inside of here I'll head over to fetch all categories, which is the controller. In case the controller finds that the result array is empty, what we're going to do is we'll go ahead and throw a HTTP error. In order to do that, let me go ahead and require in the HTTP errors. So I'll say const create error is equal to require, not the models, it's going to be the HTTP errors. HTTP -errors. Alright, so in case before I send the response, I will check if result dot length, if it is an empty array, okay, so it's going to be equal to 0. What I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially throw an error using the create error. Okay, let's say throw create error, and this is going to be let's say of type 404, which means we didn't find any categories, and we'll also give a custom message saying that no categories found. What happens now? So if we throw the error here, this will be caught by this error block, okay, and we are going to essentially console log that. So let's make use of the next function here in order to call the next here. So what I'm going to say is next error, okay, but in order to call that, I also made need to make sure I inject it here. Let's go ahead and save this. Hopefully that's restarting, and head over to the REST client now. Send the request one more time, and let's see what we get. Hopefully it will be a 404. What error did we give here? Was it 404? Yeah, it was a 404. No categories found. Super, it says not found. Oh, interesting. Why was that so? Okay, it is still categories too. We have to go back to categories here. It says no categories found, but it is not essentially sending the error back. So what went wrong here? Something obviously went wrong. Let's see. Inside of here, I'm saying throw create error. It is throwing that error, right? No categories found. The only thing is it's not necessarily propagating that error. Alright, so instead of throwing the error here, we'll just use the next function and provide the error object. And once we do that, what will happen is it will come directly over here and then pass the appropriate status and the error message. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the controllers here. Instead of throwing that, I'm going to use the next function, and I'm going to provide it the error object, which is produced by the create error call. And after this, I'm just going to say return. Right? So hopefully this will take care of the problem here. So I'll allow or wait until I get the connected to Mongo log here. I'll head over back to my REST client, send the request again. Let's see what happens. This time around we get the no categories found. This is what we set in our call here in the controller. Okay, if you look here, that's what we set here, no categories found. Okay, super. Yeah, we could also make it a little more compact, saying instead of calling the return explicitly, you just call the return. I'll just return the next object, the next function, and with the create error call, which will essentially give us the error object. Okay, and this should also work just fine. Send it over again. We should get no categories found here. Okay, super. So we have the error handling working here at the API level. The next thing that we want to do is essentially create categories. So we will define a new route which will allow us to create new categories. Okay, and subsequently we can have this executed again, which will then give us a list of categories again, which would be not empty at that time. And we can also go ahead and create another set of APIs, all the set of APIs essentially. And if you go in here, that would be categories by ID. So let's take a pause here and come back and do the create API, which is going to be a post API, right? And we'll take it forward from there, all right?